Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Jacob Silverblade, and today I'm going to be going through a whole bunch of changes and principles and why I've made those changes into how to make this game better, really. I honestly think if we did these things, these would go a long way just making the overall game, overall play of the game better for everyone involved. This would be better for aggro, control, and also mid-range players, whatever deck you want to play with. I think that doing this would be a good thing, it'll be fun, and people will enjoy it. So, we're going to just get on to a couple of things. I just wanted to talk about why do this as a fundamental, more like a fundamental change, rather than like just keep on following the meta report and like going from that and making changes every single month. Why specifically do this? Well, ultimately the meta report doesn't cover everything. I think actually even more so now than in the past. The meta report only at best really sees what is the best decks at this time. It doesn't look at the game and goes what is actually the most fun deck and what are people enjoying the most. It doesn't look at it from that aspect. And even still, particularly now, it doesn't actually show the whole picture. It doesn't show what the best deck in the game actually is. It just shows what are the average player is playing with at the time. It doesn't show someone who's really skilled at the game playing with a very complicated deck and using that to able to win a whole bunch of games, or using a very, as a very much not so good player in Legendary, for example, playing with a simple deck and using that to try and win all their games. It doesn't show that disparity. So for example, my Vara Tigurius deck, I can 100% tell you, has 90%+ win rate. You just see over your screen right now, just me going through the wins. This was in the past, this isn't what I'm looking at right now, but this was in the past, just showing, hey, I won out of these 16 games, I only lost one of them. That is quite comfortably above 90% win rate. It's a very good deck. Now this was before the balance update, so maybe Erica could prove some problems for me, but I'll be honest with everyone, unless they're able to get those new sisters spamming full of units, one-cost units down and really cause some problems, I somewhat doubt it. I still confidently think this is the best deck in the game, and it doesn't show that on, of course, the win rates. The win rates are only being 51%. So that's just one example. There's other examples, being Asmodai being the highest use rate, yet he's only actually at a 50% win rate. Doesn't make sense. Why not use in principle, right? Why not use the ones with the higher win rates? Even though I don't personally think it shows even it being the best deck. So overall, I would say that, yeah, the meta report can't be entirely trusted, even in its one purpose, and figure out what is the best warlord to use with which faction. And even then, it's not going to show other things like, gameplay style. It's not going to show things like fun factor. It's not going to show interesting builds and viable gameplay style. It's not going to do that. It's just going to take a generic what is win rate. So with that being said, let's get into some of my core principles and changes. So I've got 5 core principles in how I would change this game. I would start off with the obvious in saying nerfing the broken stuff. There is broken things in this game. I'll go through every single faction and what I believe is to be probably the most broken cards that they have, and I'll determine if it's actually just strong or broken. And not every single faction has broken cards. This doesn't mean that if their faction has a broken card, they are good right now, as a very strong faction. It just means that that individual card is broken, needs to be dealt with, and if they're actually not good as a faction, well, their other cards need buffing up. So that's the first fundamental principle. The second fundamental principle is board clears. I think board clears of all varieties aren't really good enough pretty much in this game. I'd say pretty much, but I also find another fundamental problem with board clears is that they deal damage to face. For example, we're going to get into the Stormraven for Ultramarines, but it deals damage to face and doesn't do actually its job in dealing with troops. I find no reason to why this Stormraven as a board clear needs to do that. Damage to face, but then doesn't actually, what I personally believe, to actually deal with the troops properly most of the time anyway. So we're going to be talking about some of the things like that and actually making it so that it doesn't do actually, it's not just a burn tool, but actually is a board clear tool, as it should be. Next up, we're going to be talking about anti-stealth. Anti-stealth is very lacking in this game, and to be frankly honest, the good anti-stealth cards which exist in the game often isn't an anti-stealth card, it just happens to be good against stealth units. A good example would be Ultramarines with Captain Titus using Devastator Doctrine. It's not actually an anti-stealth card, but guess what, I'm going to save it for when there's stealth units, they're able to deal with stealth units as an anti-stealth card. It's weird, it's strange, and I don't think it should be the case. I think it should be different. I think it should be used differently in principle. It should be used as a dealing with multiple troops while still able to do damage to face sort of card, not actually as a board clear, that's something different. But it's used as an anti-stealth card, really, for most Ultramarine Titus decks, if I had to be frankly honest. And so hence it ends up playing just a different role and purpose. I believe anti-stealth cards should be able to deal with stealth units. And I don't just mean make them not stealthful anymore, I mean actually deal with them so they're not a problem anymore. That is what I'm talking about. That being said, I think stealth units could use a slight buff. I think there's certain stealth units in this game, notably with the Tyranids, which actually don't do their job, like so to speak, properly, when they used to. But they were too strong because they had stealth, and stealth there wasn't enough anti-stealth to justify their power. With more anti-stealth, we're going to need to make these stealth units better to justify themselves. Finally, I will be talking about certain playstyles within the game which I just don't think sees enough play within each faction, and could use some buffs to be able to justify their existence more. So let's get into it. The Ultramarines. So we're going to be talking about the first broken card and what I believe to be broken with this game, and I think we'll go straight to Sergeant Talion. I genuinely believe there's nothing else broken within Ultramarines, and which needs justifying, needs nerfing and stuff. Assault Doctrine has been dealt with, which is one of the broken things in the past, and I genuinely think there is just nothing else which is truly broken as an Ultramarines card. There's a lot of good cards, don't get me wrong, but there's still also Sergeant Talion. Sergeant Talion, of course, is a 3/6 with 6 life. More importantly, it's the Codex ability. Codex refill 1 energy. This I believe to be a broken effect, because of the Sergeant Talion via Tigurius combo, putting down basically your entire hand in a single turn, triggering a whole bunch of Codex triggers, and enabling Avenging Zeal as a free card afterwards. This way you get a permanent, really powerful buffed up board with a buffed up Warlord, meaning that even if you're able to deal with the board most of the time, you still have to deal with the opponent's Warlord, which is a big difficult thing to deal with, and doing all that for a maximum 6 energy isn't great. So this is Sergeant Talion, and I generally believe it needs a nerf. Next thing is board clears. Ultramarines actually have quite a few board clear cards, surprisingly enough, none of which really do the job. We've got Stormraven, we also have Landspeeder Hailstrike, and then we've got Redemptor Dreadnought. We're going to very quickly go through them. Stormraven I fundamentally find a problem, as I talked about, it deals damage to face, but then it doesn't actually deal with the board. Right now it deals 2 damage to all enemies. And that's alright, if for example against Ork Grot spam, if they put down a whole bunch of Grots, but if it's Ork the boy spam, then Stormraven actually doesn't deal with that board, it just hurts them a little bit. So hence it needs a fundamental change. To be actually a playable guard, they able to allow Ultramarines to be able to deal with a really go wide board. This is something which I actually would like to see, more go wide potential, but actually able to more counterplay in the, with there being more cards being able to deal with them properly so they don't just instantly die. Hence Stormraven I genuinely believe needs to have 2 damage to all troops, and then Codex deal 1 additional damage to them. This way you're not just dealing 3 damage directly to face, which is something we don't need it doing, we already have Death from above. In fact, Stormraven's dealing directly damage to face right now, I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think it should enable that pressure keep on going. In a pure aggro deck, in principle, they wouldn't run Stormraven, they would ignore all the enemy troops, and then use their aggro tools just to deal with more damage to face. Stormraven should however be an actual more like control tool that actually deal with the opponent's troops. And so hence I propose this change so that it's not an aggro tool, but it actually does deal with the board. The second thing I'd like to mostly talk about is the Redemptor Dreadnought. The Redemptor Dreadnought is a Codex ability. It deals 1 to 2 damage to all enemies. Kind of the same problem as Stormraven, it deals damage to face. But unlike the Stormraven, it only does 1 to 2, so it's even worse. Because unlike in Stormraven where you could get double Stormraven right, and it could do 4 damage to all enemies, and it actually would do its job as a board clear, Redemptor Dreadnought doesn't actually clear the board. There's a good chance you then leave. If there's 8 enemy troops on the board, you only do 2 damage. On principle, you only do 2 damage to 2 of them. The rest of them take 3, or if not 4. That means there's still 2 troops left alive, which have to be killed some other way. And guess what? I'm talking about all of this with a tactical insight play. This is where you go Redemptor Dreadnought, tactical insight, trigger the double codex with a hero power afterwards to enable a double sort of codex, deal damage to the entire board thing. Ultimately find lackluster, and it doesn't actually deal the job it's meant to intended to be doing. I do understand there is a certain aspect though that it does damage to face, which is if we made it 2 damage every single time, which would make a much fairer state, so it's guaranteed to do 4 damage across the board. Guess what? That's 4 damage to face, and then it kind of becomes an aggro tool at that point, kind of like Stormraven. Hence I propose Codex deal 2 damage to all enemy troops. This way it doesn't actually hurt the enemy face, but it actually is able to deal with the board as it's kind of intended to be. This would be an appropriate change to actually able to deal with the board, and then I don't think it needs any sort of increase in stats, and it will see interesting play. Finally, we also have Land Speed Hailstrike, and unfortunately it kind of needs it right. It needs to able to do not be as good as Redemptor Dreadnought, but still have its purpose in what it's meant to be doing. I'm afraid for its board clearing potential, I don't really see a reason to buff this. It still does 1 damage across the board. It does that sort of light damage. It's still able to remove scarabs. Still does damage to face, and I think I'm perfectly fine leaving it as it is. Yes, you would need triple tactical insight to actually deal 3 damage across the board, to able to deal with like a 3 health intended targets, like like I'm proposing with the Redemptor Dreadnought, like I'm opposing for the Stormraven. But if we make these changes, we would still have 2 board clear devices which actually work. And then this can be something like for even smaller units, for example grots, or for scarabs. And then I think I'll be perfectly fine with that. Maybe this could use just a slight stat increase, because it is a little bit of a weak unit and often doesn't see play, but I'm more than happy either way. Next up, we need to be talking about anti-stealth for the Ultramarines. Now this card, there is technically, as I said, Devastator Doctrine, which is probably the best anti-stealth the Ultramarines actually have right now. Fortunately, I don't think that should be its intended purpose. Really, the anti-stealth in this game should be Tyranid War Veteran. Rally, all enemies lose stealth and camouflage. What do I propose as a change then, to actually make it work? Here's what I propose. Rally, attack a random enemy in stealth, and it loses stealth. This way, it actually does its intended purpose as being an anti-stealth removal tool, and being able to deal with early game threatening units instead of this random deal where everybody loses stealth and then not being able to do anything about them. The only way this guy becomes useful right now is if you already have something on board to deal with the stealth units and you just need this to remove the stealth unit. But it really shouldn't be the case. Really, this guy should be dealing with the stealth unit, and it needs to have that sort of intended purpose. Because at the end of the day, if it's just as it is right now, if you use it in game, all that's going to happen is, most of the time, that the opponent's going to play the stealth unit, you're going to play this guy, it's going to lose its stealth, you're able to attack it with your Warlord, and then it lives and nothing happens. I'd rather not see that. I'd rather see something different. I'd rather see its ability to actually able to deal with the stealth unit. Next up, we're talking about certain stealth units which need buffs, and guess what? There is a stealth unit within Ultramarines. Rarely ever seen, because it's actually, to be frankly honest, quite weak as it is right now. What it is stealth, sniper, is 2-5 with 5 life. It can be quite decent against trading below, but it's stealth and it needs that. It doesn't have like the flank ability for its Scepter Sergeant to trade with below straight away, and it only has 5 life, so it doesn't stay alive. if we're going to be buffing all these anti-stealth cards, which I think they should be, it kind of needs a bit of a reward for actually playing into these sort of stuff. It needs a bit of a buff to be able to justify itself a bit more. Hence, I suggest that it has 6 range attack, just so it's able to trade with an actual 6 health unit to be able to take it out straight away. But if they have an anti-stealth, it actually gets removed pretty darn easily. For example, a Reaver would melee attack this, and it would go down to 2 life, which can then be finished off the Warlord, and guess what? The opponent will probably have 3 NG left to do something else. Real punishing effect, but if you're able to get this off, you now have a free trade piece, which doesn't even trade. It just takes out the problem for you. I think that would be a good, appropriate change. Finally, we're going to be talking about playstyles, which I think could use a little bit of buff. I want to talk about, I'm afraid, Chaplain of Horus. I absolutely love this guy, and I think he goes into a bit of different playstyles and is a bit of fun. But right now, it is the best playstyle is probably generic codex effects with sustain with Titus, or you go for Vara Tigerius, which is the codex combo plays. Nothing like actual go wide Ultramarines, nothing like actual big vehicle decks. Chaplain of Horus kind of supports, it's trying to could do either go wide or big vehicles. The other Wakai which could go big vehicles, this minus Calgar. Chaplain of Horus is just weaker compared to the rest, quite blatantly so. So I'll give his Exaltation of Rage, +1 range, give your troops +1 range attack and +1 melee. I think the appropriate buff would be good, and we'll see more interesting plays from him and able to support not just range units but also melee units as well. Making it just one, I don't think it really works. And so that is how I would change the Ultramarines. So we're talking about Orks now and the changes I would make to them. There was a couple of cards I was initially thinking of, which I thought was potentially on the broken side when it comes to Orks. The first card I was thinking was Unbridled Carnage, dealing 2 damage to an enemy, repeating effect for every single friendly unit. It used to be Troop, and I thought it was really good back in the day and was just Troop. And I guess I need to test this now, because I don't think I particularly have, but I need to test it. Is it for every single unit? Too much? But I've certainly played against it, and I can tell you it is a very strong card, and it's probably a card which is holding up the faction rather than making the faction being good within itself. Really, the faction should be good within itself, so I do think actually this could use some kind of nerf, probably to back how it was beforehand. Just as a 4 energy cost, deal 2 damage to an enemy, and repeat it for every single troop you've got. This way you're not just doing 4 damage pings guaranteed to the opponent's face. Next up, there was also the consideration I was thinking in my head with Veteran Stormboy. I think its increased melee attack isn't appropriate. I think it was a perfectly good card as a 6 melee attack and didn't need the buff. I think it just ends up becoming too much of a good removal piece as a 7 melee attack piece instead. And I think if it's not dealing with the troops that Everguild wants it to do, maybe you need to be looking at those troops being at too much life potentially, rather than Veteran Stormboy having not enough melee attack. That is the other consideration. But ultimately, after thinking a long while, I realized there was one consideration which absolutely takes the cake. That is Makari. I fundamentally find there are 2 different type of games there is out there. There is Ork games where you've got Makari, the opponent's got Makari in turn 1 in their hand, and there's Makari, turn 10 and above. These are fundamentally 2 different games because of how powerful and strong Makari is, and I ultimately do think his backlash effect should be changed for this. I'm not saying the adjacent melee attack effect shouldn't be changed. What I am saying is backlash, return to your hand, instead of it being returned to your hand, it should be returned to your deck and draw a card. So no need for the cost reduction. This way it doesn't become a useful useless tool because it just ends up becoming a 1 cost and you throw it away. But it does mean that it's not just a permanent constant buff, which is always buffing up the board, and that's something you have to constantly take damage just able to remove properly. So that's the change there. Board wipes. First thing I want to talk about is Will of Gork. I've recently played Orks, particularly Gazgol Frake and sort of control Ork sort of style, and that was a lot of fun recently, and I probably will do it again this season to able to get my 10 Ork wins. What I will say is, Will of Gork, dare I say I'm considering taking it out of my deck, because it's not doing the fundamental job that I actually need it to, which is able to deal with troops on 8 energy and not beforehand. Fundamentally, I just think the fact that it ends up killing your own stuff is a real negative actually to this card, and so hence it shouldn't be at such a high cost. I should be able to still enable to do some things along with it as well. I understand like a pure control deck, this is like a really might be see where you see play, but with my squig offs, I don't want to exactly kill that with my Will of Gork, just able to deal with someone else's opponent threat. Ultimately, I think this could actually just reverted back to the change as an 8-cost card. Make it worthwhile to remove the opponent's stuff, make it actually usable to be able to deal with the opponent's problems, and actually a usable card which isn't just sitting in my hand probably majority of the game, to be frankly honest. Another thing which I want to talk about is the Orcs' second form of board clear. No, we're not talking about Scorcher Assault. Scorcher Assault, in my opinion, is not actually a board clear. It only does 3 damage to 3 individual targets. This is sort of like an aggro tool whilst sort of keeping control of the opponent's board. Somewhat gym boss, you could say. Personally, and the second board clear that Orcs actually have is Burner Boy. It deals 2 to 3 damage to all enemies, and I already have a problem with that because it deals damage to face, but it only triggers on this when it has a Spanner or Mech Boy Gazmech. I can understand this. As a 4 energy getting a 2/5 with 4 life, able to deal 2 to 3 damage across the board is kind of a crazy rally ability. Even if it had poor stats, let's say it was a 2/2 with only 3 life, very poor stats, just able to rally, automatically deal that damage, no restrictions whatsoever, would be kind of crazy. We're looking at ultimately a Storm Raven here, but better with also a body. It kind of makes sense why it would be restricted to the cards it's trying to buff with. What I will say though is that trying to get this card and also a Spanner in your hand to be able to guarantee combo, and then having to do that for 7 energy whilst only being able to do a maximum of 3 damage with the potential of only doing 2, kind of is a real big downside. I think it should deal 3 damage to all enemy troops, and I think its rally ability should be able to trigger on Spanners, Mech Boys, and also vehicles. So Spanners and Mech Boys are trying to actually combo with a vehicle deck, so actually making it sort of a vehicle tool synergy with all of that, I think would be appropriate. After all, I remember many times actually playing Tabletop Warhammer, and my brother using Orcs, using the Burner Boys from a battle wagon to actually shoot and burn, as a sort of drive-by shooting with the Burner Boys. I find that to be a lot of fun, and I think it would be appropriate as well. They would enable this sort of combo. The other thing I would change with it is actually, I find 7 energy probably to be a bit expensive to guarantee actually deal with the board sort of scenario. I would decrease its cost by 1, but I would remove some of the stats. I would make it 2/3 with 3 life, very subpar stats for 3 cost at the end of the day, but it still has a rally effect to be able to deal damage to the board for 3 damage across the board to all troops if there's a Mech Boy, Spanner, or a vehicle. Next up, we're talking about Orcs anti-stealth. Technically, this is the anti-stealth, but really the anti-stealth right now is no mucking about. This because this doesn't actually deal with the board. No mucking about does actually deal with the stealth troop. So hence, I don't want this to be the case. I want the anti-stealth to be actual anti-stealth, because it doesn't actually deal with the troop itself, and you often don't quite have enough energy after spending a 3 energy play to actually deal with the typical stealth troop. How would I change it? I'd probably just do this. Decrease its cost to 2. Sounds crazy, I know, but if you're using this in a 5 cost to deal with a stealth Tyranid guy, you can play Warbiker back with that, you can play a Grot on a Bomb Squig. If you're getting it early, yes, you do nearly get a bit lucky, but you can do that with an attack squig, potentially to be able to stun the thing straight away, so hence the cost reduction becomes really nice, able to deal with it the following turn. Or if you get lucky, you get a Grot on a Bomb Squig, Grot Bomb, they're able to actually deal with the opponent's stuff. I'd find this to be far more interesting, and just that cost reduction gives you so many more available options to deal with quite a few stealth units. And kind of with attack squigs and stuff like that, the slow down stun potential, other things as well. For example, you could combine that with potentially Scorcher Assault, if Scorcher Assault doesn't actually properly deal with it itself. But you could potentially combine that with, where am I looking for, the other stun card, the Iron Gob, they're able to get a concussive effect on your Warlord, so you're able to remove stealth. Then there's an Iron Gob, able to stun the stealth troop, which is no longer in stealth, and then you can use it as an overall combination effect to then later on able to deal with things. However, I ultimately don't think it's worthwhile for 7 energy, but at 6 energy, you're now looking at a play which could happen. So that is how I would add anti-stealth to Orks. Stealth units which could use buffs, the only thing there is here is the not tank buster commando. This is actually a really good stealth unit, and I highly recommend all Ork players actually start using this guy far more often. You will find you have much more success with this guy having 8 melee attack, 7 life. He's a big boy to actually have to remove in the first place, and that constant ability to keep on gaining stealth all the time just by merely living is really good effect. It becomes a constant threat for your opponent to actually have to deal with. They have to think outside the box to actually kind of deal with it, unless they're Orks, in which case they'll know mucking about it. Even then, because of that reason, I don't think this unit actually needs a buff, because I think it's perfectly fine as it is, potentially even too strong as it is, and really Ork players should be using this far more often than they are right now, to be frankly honest. Stealth units, so that's stealth units. What buffs would I give to Orks? There's 2 cards I want to be talking about. Rucker Truck Twig Buggy and then Grizzled Scarboy. Ultimately, Ork vehicle decks don't often see play. The only time I saw a killer can was when Gruck was overpowered and broken, and that wasn't a good thing, to be frankly honest. I think vehicle decks for Orks still, even despite the unstable changes, don't see enough play. And that's kind of suggests to me that they have a more fundamental problem rather than them being actually a bad with the cards actually needing some changes to make them more synergistic with each other, to actually provide more play, maybe more play with particularly the mob mechanic, because right now mob with vehicles is how you get your buffs from the spanner, but actually isn't something you often trigger to be able to get the buffs from the spanner because they're all doing range attack. That is one consideration. The second thing I would say is that the Rocket Truck Twiggery within itself, unfortunately, is just nothing how it used to be. Yes, 1 armor is nice, but I think personally flank is a lot more powerful, and with its decreased stats from back in the day, I don't think it fundamentally does what it kind of needs to be doing at its cost for what its purpose actually is. This is the change I would propose. Remove the armor, give it flank, increase the range attack to 6, but actually decrease its health to 4. This way it actually becomes a removal piece with a high range attack, and would struggle to get a strike off, only being able to really do that against the sort of weak targets because of that 4 life. This way it doesn't become much of an aggro tool, but becomes more of a removal piece, specifically trying to take out things with 6 life exactly. That's how, and I think, yeah, I struggle. One final thing, sorry. Grizzled Scarboy. This, as you might remember back in the day, did used to cost 5 energy. Now, I can somewhat understand why Everguild did change this to increase the cost of this from 5 to 6. Fundamentally, I do not think back in the day this was ever the problem with Orks. I think there has been plenty of ways of getting around it. You could still do damage to your Ork Warlord, particularly if you get high attack stats. And I think there is quite a big tempo loss for even playing it back then as a 5 cost. Now as a 6 cost, there's even a bigger tempo loss, and there's very difficult to actually play this in an Ork control deck and actually get what worthwhile uses out of it. That being said, I can still somewhat understand why, if you're doing a whole bunch of aggro and you're going for early game, how this could potentially prevent aggro play. Here's the proposed change. You either make it 5 cost as it used to be and you keep it as it is, or you maybe reduce its cost to 5, but then you remove the extra health bonus from it. So they're not actually getting a health advantage, they're just getting that armor 1 of the Warlord. It makes it less interesting, but fairer. The other option is to keep it at 6 life, but make the health advantage actually increase from +1 to +3. This way you're actually getting a decent amount of life from using Grizzled Scarboy, and you're actually not actually left behind by playing this. And yes, that is actually how I change Orks. So now we're talking about Eldar, and what potential broken cards do they have? I went through the list of individual broken cards, and I have to conclude that the only card I have individually, which is way more powerful than the rest, which I could consider to be broken, is Wailing Doom. Wailing Doom has the potential just to finish the opponent off out of nowhere, sort of, so to speak, dealing 8 damage directly to the enemy face because it's targetable and it's brilliant for that purpose. I personally think, though, as a legendary, it is their strongest card. I'm not going to call this broken. I'm just going to call this a strong card and doesn't actually need any changes. I think that ability to deal 8 damage face, don't get me wrong, is always something you have to be factoring in, and it's always a good effect, but the fact that there's only 1 copy of this and isn't, for example, 2 copies, makes this perfectly fine and not problematic. So, what anti-stealth, what board clears do we have? Eldar only actually have 1 board clear card in their faction. Thankfully, it is a good one. It's Eldritch Storm. Eldritch Storm does 1 to 3 damage to all enemies, and yes, on my fundamental principles, all board clears they should be able to do a minimum of 3 damage to actually deal with boards properly, go wide boards properly. It doesn't technically do that, but it does have the stone effect to repeat the effect, so your chances of only able to deal 2 damage to an individual target is 1 in 9. That personally is very low, and I found it most of the time they able to consistently deal with such a wide board, and even if it misses out 1 guy out of like 8 guys when with an Eldritch Storm, you can just take that out with your Warlord afterwards. I ultimately find this to be perfectly fine. The stone effect is perfectly appropriate. They're able to be utilized, synergized with this faction. I find no problems with this overall, and I think this works. I think this perfectly works, and there's no need to change this whatsoever. Next up, we need to be talking about anti-stealth. Eldar do have an anti-stealth card. It's Dire Avenger Exarch. Bit like the Reaver, it doesn't actually do its job, but it's worse because it costs even more. It does have pretty scary stats, being 6 melee attack, 6 life, and shuriken free, means that on the attack it can actually do 9 damage, but actually as a stealth removal target, it doesn't really do anything. It only just removes them from stealth, and then the stealth units are still there, so it's as if you didn't even remove them from stealth in the first place because you didn't actually deal with them. Fundamentally, I would give it the same buff that the Reaver has. Rally, attack a random enemy in stealth, then I would actually keep its rally effect or removing all enemy stealth and camouflage effects. I think this would be perfectly fine, and as a dedicated 6 cost anti-stealth tool, I think that's actually pretty fair, even factoring in that it's got shuriken free with 6 melee attack. Next up, we need to be talking about the stealth units for Eldar, and this is where I'm very hesitant because a lot of their stealth units are good. You know, we got Striking Scorpion, we know we got Warp Spiders, we've recently introduced to other stealth units like the Warp Spider Exarch, and then we also got the Death Spinner Warp Spider, and then some fundamental things like Origin Laphoros, I can't even pronounce his name, and Striking Scorpion Exarch, all being brilliant examples of very scary and very deadly stealth units. Fundamentally, the only thing I should really receive some kind of buff is maybe Striking Scorpion Exarch. I'm not saying to its damage output, just giving it free life. So it's able to remain better, able to maybe trade with some troops better, and actually becomes a threat. It still only has that 2 range attack. It's just factoring in the fact that this guy has very low life for its cost, and with now improved these stealth units, the stealth buffs, actually able to deal with these things, it should be appropriate changes for that. For example, if a Reaver still gets played, it's still then able to kill this with your Warlord as a 5 cost, you know, for only 3 cost at the end of the day. And that's totally worthwhile on such a scary unit. And so hence, I ultimately think this guy could use 1 extra life. For the other stealth units, at such a low cost, you're not going to see this being played to individually deal with them. So I don't think anything really here needs some kind of health bonus. The only thing I could really think of is maybe Ranger going up to 3 life because of this anti-stealth effects, but that's about it. And I struggle to see anything particularly else that I would able to change / replace to able to enable this stuff. Finally, we're done talking about a playstyle which I think doesn't really see enough play, and that's because I don't think it has enough support, and that is Sordus's Wraith Guard using Host of the Dead gameplay style, which I think will be far more fun and interesting. Right now, Wraith Guard is very subpar stats considering its 4 cost. Yes, the stone effect I actually think is really bloody good, making it a 2/5 for 6 cost, but then you have to have the stone effect, which I find to be the fundamental problem. Same thing again, there's also things like the Wraith Blade, which doesn't often get seen play. You know, we've got Host of the Dead, which doesn't see play, and then finally we've got the Wraith Lord also, which I don't think I've ever seen played before, to be frankly honest. I don't know a time when even one person has considered playing this, which is kind of crazy that, you know, after all this time, we still have such a terrible card, which is what exists within this faction. Hence, I would suggest that we do some fundamental changes. Wraith Lord should probably have some kind of Vanguard effect. Maybe you have to spend stones to get the Vanguard effect, 2 stones gain Vanguard, but I think that would be perfectly fine, to be frankly honest, because his stats are perfectly good as it is. Secondly, I would like to see some sort of synergy play with this card with all the other Wraith cards potentially. You have that Vanguard effect, but also cost, say, whenever you play a Wraith unit, their stone effects triggers straight away. So for example, you play this, if it does live, which you would be quite lucky to do so, but let's say it does, you could then start playing Vengeful Wraith Blades for free without needing to play the stone effects. This way you can save on stones, which seems to be the fundamental lacking thing behind for a lot of these Wraith decks in general, and from being playable in the first place. So hence, I think that would be a very appropriate change overall. Now we're moving on to the Necrons, and I was thinking about this, going, what is truly broken about Necrons? You could argue Imhotep, you know, he does have a very powerful ability, but that's more in synergy with the Immortal Pride being a particularly good buff piece for Imhotep, and I don't think they're individually broken. One could argue they're collectively broken, but I think that's fine. Another thing what I found to cause problems in the past was definitely Locust Lord. He can cause some very difficult situations with that constant resurrection orb ability being granted by him, causing this constant, you know, resurrecting yourself and then getting back up and then not being able to truly deal with it. I can understand that, but I've also found times when I can just deal with this and it's not been a problem. Other scenarios what I thought was broken, for example the Hexmark Destroyer is very strong and stuff, and there's other things that Necrons I think are just very strong. For example, a damage Hexmark also, but not truly broken. If you know how to play around it, I think you can. But there is 2 cards which I would say could come into that tier. The first one is the Ophidian Destroyer. It's the legendary 3-drop which is able to gain stealth, which is quite crucial with my argument here, and then regeneration 2, and also has Destroyer. With their constant ability, they're able to remove the opponent's stuff, and then also has the stealth ability to constantly stay alive without regeneration 2, I think can be very problematic. However, I think his nerf is coming with the fact that better anti-stealth should be implemented into this game. I don't think this guy will need a nerf once the better anti-stealth exists in this game. So I think, you know, him not getting buffed, after from saying all stealth units should get buffed in principle, is him also not getting nerfed because it's going to cancel out him not getting nerfed because there's better anti-stealth in this game. Overall, I think this would make this actually card a very fair card if anti-stealth was actually just good and actually dealt with things like this. Next thing I will talk about though is Undying Legion. Unfortunately, I think this card is on the broken tier and does sort of just, it just goes over that edge. With the fact that all remnants have shield, and it does give you that shield early on for the stave off tempo, like aggro and stuff like that, it can be very, very difficult to just find places where you're going to have double pings that actually also deal with the remnants on top of dealing with the units itself. It can lead to scenarios where you actually can't deal with the Necron board because all their stuff are shield. This fundamentally I find, you know, really quite scary, and can lead to scenarios which is too overwhelming. Same time though, I can understand from a Necron player's perspective that if they do have this card, they ultimately can't actually, how do I put this? So they find they actually can't play the card and then also be able to be in the situation to actually deal with the opponent's stuff that they're threatening them with. So I can understand both sides. Hence, I'm a little bit torn, if I had to be honest, if whether this card actually reaches the broken tier or not. On one hand, I think it's way too good if you're actually able to play it on free energy and have that constant shields being removed all game, wasting so many valuable resources from your opponent to actually make sure the Necrons don't get out of control. At the same time, in reverse, I think it can also become sort of like a too weak and not give that sort of crucial survivability. If you play it later on in the game, aim as a sort of free energy play, not able to deal with the opponent's stuff properly. Ultimately, I would conclude that this might need to just go and increase its cost to 4 energy. That might be a fair place to put this in, but I am a little bit torn. Dare I say it needs to have 3.5 energy, not that 0.5 energy exists, but I think you get what I'm saying. I don't know if this is too much or too little. Considering how strong Imperil is, I would suspect just increasing it to 4 cost would be better on the put things on the safer side of things rather than it being just a free cost, because Imperil is very strong. Next up, we need to be talking about board clears for the Necrons, and fundamentally I find that there are 2 board clear cards that the Necrons can have. The Hexmark's Destroyer, which I actually think is perfectly fine as what it does, deal with 1 damage for random enemies. Necrons typically have the 1 energy card abilities to enable the combos for the Hexmark's Destroyer. They're able to deal with the board properly. So this is a change that I don't think needs to happen and does become a late game board wide removal piece, and it does its job pretty darn well. The other thing I'd say though is something that I don't think really does its job properly, kind of like the Storm Raven from Ultramarines earlier. The Scythe Assault. Same thing again, I don't think it needs to deal damage to face. What I do think it needs to do is a constant free damage across the board to be able to deal with troops properly. This way, you're actually not massively falling behind because you didn't get that 50-50 shot presumably to actually deal with the opponent's troops, and you're not just there going, what was I meant to do about that? I guess I'll have to just get more lucky next time. Because if someone does deploy a whole bunch of troops by the 5 energy point, which all have 3 in life, this ultimately won't able to just properly deal with them. You're kind of just going to be falling behind, but it is still your best option even despite the case, and I don't think that's a good thing. So I fundamentally make it so it does, because it doesn't need to deal damage to face, and that is not how Necrons really win. They don't win by dealing damage to face. I would just make it deal free damage to all enemy troops, and I think that would be appropriate and good change. Next up, we're going to be talking about anti-stealth in this game. Anti-stealth Necrons do actually have an anti-stealth card, Solar Pulse. Blind all enemies, they lose stealth and camouflage. This I ultimately find, unless it's a troop which actually has really high range attack, but then actually has very low melee attack, doesn't really work, unfortunately. It's blind effect, it doesn't do the job it needs to do. It doesn't actually deal with a troop. Most stealth troops, to be frankly honest in this game, has very high melee attack and very low range attack. I think the Ultramarines is the only one which actually has it reversed, really. Maybe, actually Eldar do have their Warp Spider guy, but that's it. Everything else is just not the case, so to be able to enable all the effects becoming one worthwhile just doesn't really work. This is the proposed change I would actually give to enable this from working. To enable this to be able to work. And I think it's the first effect of dealing they will lose stealth and camouflage is appropriate, but I'd say all enemies in stealth get stunned, then they lose stealth and camouflage. So yes, we are removing the blind effect, but then it does become a proper anti-stealth tool because you get that extra turn of being able to deal with the stealth units. Yes, you might be able to do it on the turn, deal with them on the turn with something else, but that's more of a longer term sort of like plan play on 10 energy, but it's just a 4 energy. You get that extra time to be able to actually deal with the stealth units, and it isn't just a stop in one size fits all anti-stealth ability, one size fits all anti-stealth ability just by dealing damage to them. We don't want just all the anti-stealth effects to only be damage. We want them to be interesting and unique in their own ways, and Necrons typically play the long game anyway, so that sort of effect would be more appropriate. The other thing I would change it to do is also just decrease its cost to free energy. I just think for its effect it's actually pretty expensive, and making it full cost I think probably just is too much, particularly for what I want it to be doing. I think its change would be appropriate and fair. Next up, we've got stealth units for Necrons, and Necrons do actually have a stealth unit. It is the Death Mark. The Death Mark, a sniper, rally if you control no other troops, gain stealth. It's interesting, however I will say that I think this guy could use a buff, considering that anti-stealth is getting better. This guy costs 4, and if the opponent plays a Reaver, for example, it's just not able to deal with this straight away. It's going to leave the Reaver on 2 life, the opponent can then remove the Remnant straight away with their Warlord, and nothing really has been done to actually gain the tempo, and if in this exact situation the Warlord hasn't taken any damage, and yet the tempo, I'm trying to think now, they might have extra energy actually to be able to deal with other things go along with it. Hence, considering the rally ability, there's a restriction on gaining stealth and it's not automatic. I would change it so that its health goes back up to 4, so that it's an appropriate change, so it can fit within sort of this sort of playstyle of being a stealthy unit and able to avoid damage, but then there's actually good counterplay with anti-stealth cards. And then I want to talk about one final thing, Necron cards which can be buffed. Ultimately, I find a lot of Necron cards to actually be very good. Even things like their Monolith isn't really that bad of a card, because you play with a couple of 1-drop stratagems, you're able to get a lot of Necron warriors because of its Archer Fist ability, making it actually a really good sort of Vanguard caddy tool piece. I ultimately find that there's very little cards which is actually I would consider a bad card within the Necron faction, and they all can be used and be seen in some kind of play, and so don't desperately need some kind of buff. The only archetype I would say which really could use something is the Destroyer archetype. A lot of these Destroyer cards do actually feel lackluster, and even with Ramatek to try and make them worthwhile, it doesn't really work out, and the only cards which with Destroyer gets really used is the Scorefector Lord flank card, and maybe the Damage Hex Mark to be able to deal damage to face. Here's the fundamental change that I propose that we make happen. Scorefector Lord, probably the worst Destroyer card there is. I would fundamentally just probably give this guy... Would I give this guy Vanguard? Yes. I think I would just give this guy Vanguard. Maybe you can increase his health by a little bit, decrease it to 7, so that it becomes a bit more of an easier removal piece, but I think that would be fine. I think he's also more of a melee beat stick, so I'd probably fiddle with the melee and range attack stats because he's meant to be more melee based, particularly if I am going to give him Vanguard. But here's the main thing I want to kind of give him. I would give him the effect the Destroyers can ignore the Destroyer effect and still and act normally. This way, it can be a really nice useful tool within a particular Ramatek deck, where you're able to buff up Ramatek's attack stats with, like, where is it? Not Immortal Pride, or you can with Conquering Tyrant. With his, hero power ability, could get up to 7 attack, which could be really quite scary, but quite often you can't send it to face because there's a random goober there getting in your way. Scorefector Lord could be an enabler for Ramatek. They would actually go face within that combo, and I think would be rather interesting. And that is Necrons. Now we're moving on to the Black Legion. Yes, the Chaos Space Marines. Fundamental broken cards for the Black Legion. I really struggled to find a fundamental broken card within this Legion. The best thing you can probably come up with is Venom Crawler for the cost reduction. Maybe you could argue that Helldrake Strike if it constantly always did 6 damage to you, but that's ultimately just not the case in real reality for most people. Maybe you could call out Dracnien doing a bit too much, but I think it's fine as a legendary, as a one-off card. So I'm going through the list and I'm just going, no, I think there's nothing broken with them. Oh wait, hold on. There's actually one thing. And that is the thing which enables all the combos to go off. And you can't really find it until you go to Dark Pact of Fate. It's not just this Rubric Marine which uses the Dark Pact of Fate. It is every single Chaos unit where you have a choice is always going to go for Dark Pact of Fate. It is simply the best option in 9 times out of 10 scenarios to go Dark Pact of Fate first. The 1 time out of 10 you'll choose something different is when you're really low on life and you just desperately need a Vanguard body to be able to stand in the way so you don't die. Hence, sometimes you see a Chosen go for Vanguard, but the majority of the time it really just wants to be a 4-4 with 6 life instead of a 6-4 with 4 life. +2 life is a lot better than +2 melee or range attack. In fact, 1 life is equivalent to 1-on-1 on both. And that's why, when you factor in it also gains camouflage, it's quite comfortably the best Dark Pact that you can give to any unit, particularly as a first initial one. That being said though, it is a fundamental core identity to Chaos that they have this, Chaos Space Marines, that they have this ability within their roster. So I don't think we should instantly absolutely nuke this slight mechanic just because it might lead to somewhat problematic scenarios. So here is what I propose change. I propose that it still gives the +2 life and it gives the camouflage until your next turn. This way it does its purpose of being able to make your unit survive the extra turn, and if you wanted to survive another turn, you would give it camouflage again using it and finding another way to be able to give a Dark Pact of Fate, and you're able to keep on the cycle going. But you have to enable the cycle, so to speak. You can't just constantly always have camouflage unit which has a whole bunch of armor because you did disgusting resilience, which doesn't make sense with Tzeentch, but whatever. To enable a combo to make an unkillable unit because the opponent doesn't have targeted hard removal. Or does have targeted hard removal, doesn't have random hard removal to be able to deal with this. Ultimately, I think that would be appropriate and fair change to just bring things in line. It doesn't mean that it just prevents really crazy damage combos which would absolutely destroy the universe, and it also prevents, really, it allows more interplay between both the opponent and you, and it just allows the opponent to actually able to deal with certain units. Most of the time losing camouflage isn't that much of a big deal anyway, because quite often you have camouflage for 1 turn and then you attack with the guy, which makes it lose camouflage anyway. It's just those edge case scenarios where it could just continue to maintain camouflage the entire time and there's no real way to deal with said unit. This would be an appropriate change to just avoid those toxic scenarios, but that is ultimately the only thing I can complain about as Chaos being too strong / overbearing. So let's get into the board clears. Next up, we've got the board clears. We got double Trader's Hate and double Spawn-Them. Ultimately, for their cost, I think these are perfectly fine board clears. Stormraven, reason why it needs to deal 3 damage to all enemy troops is because it's actually double the cost of Trader's Hate, but you can ultimately play 2 Trader's Hates in principle for 1 Stormraven, which means that you do 4 damage across the board, which means that it does actually achieve its intended purpose because it's so cheap. Same with Spawn-Them, does the same purpose, but if there's a couple troops with 2 life and a couple troops with 3 life, you can target the ones you want to with the Spawn-Them effect, enabling you to actually deal with the threats that you need to in the first place. Hence, I think they're both perfectly fine. The only thing I would say is that you kind of do need both Trader's Hate and both Spawn-Them to enable the plays that you need to do, which kind of forces all Chaos Space Marine players to include those 2 of these cards and 2 of these cards by default, which I think is a little bit of a shame. However, I don't know how to exactly deal with that right now and think about it in this moment, so hence I would change nothing about Chaos. And yes, you don't have to include 2 of these cards and 2 of these cards to actually have effective threatening Chaos Space Marine deck, but I can accept that. Next up, we're not talking about anti-stealth for this game, for Chaos Space Marines, and Chaos Space Marines don't have anti-stealth. There is literally nothing within their faction roster which actually removes stealth from an opponent's troops, and I think this is the first time that we've seen a faction which doesn't actually have proper anti-stealth towards an opponent in this game. The best anti-stealth they've got is, so to speak, is Helldrake Strike, and that's because you're able to deal damage to face and then damage to 2 adjacent stealth units next to the enemy warlord. They're actually able to deal with them properly if you kill them, which can certainly happen. It does 3 to 6 damage, and you'll be surprised how often it does 6 damage for some random reason. This would make Helldrake actually a really good and decent anti-stealth card for that principle, but it's not actually an anti-stealth card. It's not made for that purpose and does many other things also with it. So hence, I do genuinely believe that Chaos Space Marines do need some kind of proper anti-stealth card. There were 2 cards I can think of for this purpose. First off is Demon Blade Legionary. This guy's strike ability really doesn't do that much, and his stats, even though isn't too bad, isn't amazing either, isn't really want to be playing, isn't really being seen play anywhere else, and it's not as if this strike ability is the most fanciest ability as well and is super unique. Ultimately, I think his ability could be replaced for something very similar to the Reavers, utilizing that high melee attack instead of the Reavers' overall average stats attack to be able to deal with whatever stealth unit. This guy's going to be trying to trade in melee attack to be able to deal with the stealth. And you might ask, what justifies this guy being able to find things in stealth? My justification is that the Demon Blade is leading him towards the stealth units so he can kill them. That's my lore justification for it. The other thing we could talk about is Unholy Smite. This is another card, unfortunately, which doesn't see particularly much play, because trying to do the entire combo off where you have multiple Dark Packs down and you play this for free is kind of like a win more situation, and so hence you end up getting scenarios where the only time this really gets to see play is in times when there's never an in-between point where this becomes viable, but then actually it just doesn't work. Fundamentally, I would change the identity of this card to see more interesting play, because majority of the time Helldrake Trike ends up being played instead of Unholy Smite. I'll change this card to deal 3 damage to an enemy in stealth, and it loses stealth, and repeat this effect for every single friendly troop with a Dark Pact. This way you're able to constantly deal with multiple stealth units, and I would find that very interesting. I'd also decrease its cost to about 3 energy, so it ends up having interesting play with your faction, still has that Dark Pact synergy, but then actually does become a dedicated anti-stealth tool to be able to guarantee 3 damage for free against stealth units and be able to deal with them properly. Overall, I think this would be an appropriate good change. Stealth units which could potentially use buffs. There is some stealth units here which could use buffs. One of them is the Skeins of Fate, they're able to give a troop stealth. However, I think for what it does with the draw, crawl and drawing cards ability, I think it works perfectly well to leave it as it is. The second thing is of course the Warp Talon. The Warp Talon has 6 melee attack and 5 life, and with that anti-stealth ability, sorry, not anti-stealth ability, with stealth ability, it's a very scary card, particularly with flying as well, to be able to deal with some flyers here and there. Ultimately, this is the card which you most of the time use to enable a combo with Murderous Desires to kill your opponent's face in, and it's very, very strong. The fact that it's got 5 life on top of that, I actually find no particular reason why this guy needs some kind of buff to justify its existence. Maybe you increase its life, because I don't want to increase its melee attack to enable Murderous Desires. I think it's fine as it is, but I wouldn't want to increase its life, to be frankly honest, to 6, because it's such a good card anyway. Even with stealth buffs, I don't think this would be breaking the bank by not buffing this card. Finally, gameplay styles for Chaos, which I think could use more support / play. And I would quite like to see a bit more Black Crusade synergies. And hear me out, because Ecclesiarch's don't really like this change, because he's been banging about this for ages. The Black Crusade has a very interesting unique effect, and is deploy 4 random troops from your deck. They come into play, and it's directly from the deck, and here's the key thing. We're going to go very quickly to Dark Angels to talk about a mechanic called Teleport. You might be very familiar with it, but Teleport does something if played from the same turn as it was drawn, and you only draw things from your deck. So in principle, if you gave the Terminator, Chaos Terminator, it is a Terminator like the Dark Angels Terminators, the Teleport ability, to gain 2 armor. This would lead to a very, I believe, interesting card within a deck as a cool Vanguard piece, specifically for a Black Crusade deck. Because quite often, this guy can feel a little bit lackluster, but necessary as a Vanguard piece to put inside a Black Crusade deck to be able to protect all the other guys. But then at the same time, he doesn't really have the cool synergies to enable the chaos plays, so he ends up just not being played in any sword deck whatsoever. Ultimately, I'd like to see that change, the teleport gaining 2 armor, so it actually has to be dealt with in the Black Crusade deck, and the Black Crusade really enabling this guy to be a scary proper Vanguard frontline troop which does its job. For this, I would decrease its melee attack to 4, because just in case the opponent could get extremely lucky, draw this on 6, play this for 6 for an instant teleport effect, and then it would be really valuable as a 5/6 with 6 life, having 2 armor as well with Vanguard as a really scary 6 drop, which could probably deal with anything of its same cost. Overall, I think decrease for 1 reduces melee by 1, making it 4 attack, and giving that teleport 2 armor would lead it to being a very, very interesting card for Chaos Space Marines, enabling the Black Crusade decks better. So now we're moving on to the final of the beginner factions for this game, the game that it initially released with, and that is Tyranids. Tyranids we've got Neurophrope, Swarmlord, whatever. We need to be talking about potential broken things for this faction, and there is one which has been here since the beginning of the game. That is the Broodlord. The Broodlord does have a very, very powerful synergy, particularly with its stealth effect and its synapse effect for triggering twice, or any synapse effect. Is it just when this unit triggers synapse, it triggers twice, making it have extremely scary combos, giving a whole bunch of things armor, giving a whole bunch of things extra life, particularly with Adrenal Surge, increasing attacks massively this turn on your Warlord to enable a really scary sort of finisher play, with particularly Ravenous Hunger being able to one-shot people out of nowhere. This is a situation which I'd kind of like to avoid, and would be more interesting if there's actual good counterplay for this scenario, rather than it just being I got Broodlord with Ravenous Hunger, now I win sort of scenario. What I would say is that it needs some sort of fundamental change here. Now there is the argument, and I can completely do agree, that we should test this out first to see whether Broodlord's too strong. Ultimately, Broodlord does have 6 life, and here's the argument: if we don't buff up all the anti-stealth tools, particularly with, like, for example, Eldar's anti-stealth tool, that would be a really good tool to be able to deal with this Broodlord, instantly removing it from the game, being able to chuck down the Shuriken with their 6 free range attack, killing it straight away, and then you don't actually have a Broodlord anymore, and guess what, you can't do the Adrenal Surge combo anymore. And if you're playing against Tyranids, known with all their stealth factions, you'd probably be saving your anti-stealth for the key crucial turn when you really need to actually remove something, because your entire deck isn't going to be filled with anti-stealth cards. What I will say is that you're not always guaranteed to get anti-stealth into your hand and draw it to enable to deal with proper scary stealth units, so maybe this card is still too strong anyway. I don't know what to exactly change in those scenarios to enable things to be perfectly fine. Maybe a decrease in life from 6 to 5, making it easier to when they do get anti-stealth, but I wouldn't really see that, to be frankly honest, because if they have the anti-stealth, it should be in principle to actually good enough to deal with it anyway. It's more the scenarios when the opponent doesn't have the anti-stealth and they instantly lose on the turn afterwards because they manage to pull off some sort of scary and crazy combo. Ultimately, I'd leave this the same for now, but something certainly to be reviewed later on as a potential problematic thing, because I think this guy is still kind of a crazy card for Tyranids, and actually always has been. So, we're going to be talking about now the board clears. The Tyranids actually have 2 board clear type like cards in their deck. First off, Ravenous Hunger. Ravenous Hunger ultimately does achieve the fundamental principles of what it's meant to be doing, dealing 3 damage across the board to all enemies, and if someone dies, heal 2 to your Warlord. I would keep this just as it is. Yes, I'd even accept it doing damage to face. After all, the Necrons card is being bumped up at a 5 energy cost, able to deal 3 damage to enemy troops. Even though I don't think this needs to be able to do damage to face, I never found this to be particularly the problem with it dealing damage to face. It's really, the scary thing about it is that it just kills all the enemy Vanguard troops and actually heals up the enemy Warlord by a lot because of its effects. And so hence, I'm saying this is a perfectly fine card, perfectly suitable card, perfectly appropriate card, and doesn't need changes. The second card I would consider this is Darkening Skies. Darkening Skies deals 1 damage to all enemies. It's a very, simple card, very perfectly fine for what it does. I would say we should decrease cost probably to 1. I understand that it dealing maybe damage to face might be too much. Maybe it should decrease to 1, but then it only deals 1 damage to all enemy troops. And typically you only ever see this card when Scarabs start becoming a problem. You probably saw this as skirmish mode if you played a lot of Scarabs. Tyranids use this card to actually deal with a whole bunch of Scarab opponents, which I can completely understand. This card ultimately becomes... I think this card would be perfectly fine as a 1 energy card. It would just enable nice combos with the Spore guy, Spore Assist, able to deploy a whole bunch of spores, able to just get that extra ping damage in, and it would be a nice card with Maleceptor, not Zone Throat, but Maleceptor, they able to grant a whole bunch of extra shield synergies. I don't think it's going to be overly problematic. It would just be a nice niche card to able to deal with that 1 extra ping damage, to able to maybe deal with a threat in the right situation. And I often, even with this buff, I don't think it's even going to see massive amounts of play just by reducing its cost to 1. Next up, we're going to be talking about Tyranids anti-stealth cards. And Tyranids actually do have a decent anti-stealth card. This is the Ravener. The Ravener is a rally effect, deal 3 damage to random enemy in stealth, and it loses stealth. Ultimately, the only reason why this guy doesn't see play is because it doesn't have what I would consider to be average stats. They're able to make it worthwhile as a play, just as a tempo play. Unlike the Reaver, which I would argue does have average stats, because it does have 3/3 for 4 life, for 3 energy. Even actually that might be a little bit above average stats. This, however, has a 4/2 with 4 life for 4 energy. So it has average stats for 3 costs, making it not average for 4 costs. I would simply increase its range attack to 3 and its health to 5. This is a 4/3 with 5 life, quite a typical stat line I see in this game for 4 costs, and I consider that to be just probably around about average for its cost. Its rally ability does what it needs to do on the tin. Most targets it's not able to deal with it itself. The few targets it doesn't, it probably doesn't have 6 life, so you're able to deal with your Warlord afterwards, and it's actually able to deal with the threats that you need it to. Excuse me. Ultimately, I think that would just be a simple change, so it's not falling behind for all the other Tyranid cards just as a simple tempo play if you have no other option, but you're not massively ahead either. But it does still enable the plays that actually would deal with the stealth units in the right situations when you also need to be able to do that. Next up, we're going to be talking about certain stealth units, and I think this is the faction which has really been affected by the fact that there hasn't been proper anti-stealth in this game, and I'll explain why. Tyranids have a lot of stealth cards. Gene Stealers, Lictors, Death Leapers, all these stealth cards, Morlocks, all these stealth cards which ultimately doesn't really get dealt with. That can cause a lot of problems, but they used to be much more powerful back in the day. For example, Death Leaper, I'm pretty sure had 5 life and then 7 melee attack, and I can confidently tell you that Lictor at least had 5 melee attack with 5 life back in the day as sort of like a decent removal piece. And if you compare the Lictor to the Warp Talon from Chaos Space Marines, the Warp Talon from Chaos Space Marines has flying, has the same amount of life, same range attack, but actually has 2 more melee attack on top of this. Kind of puts things in perspective and why some cards are just way more powerful than others. Ultimately, this is not exactly Tyranid's fault, but they had a lot of good decent stealth cards, but there was no proper anti-stealth in the game, so they actually had to nerf a lot of the Tyranid's cards to bring them back in line so they weren't just too overbearing and too problematic. It meant that they actually could deal with their stealth cards without needing anti-stealth, just because the stealth units weren't actually that scary. Ultimately, stealth units should be scary and should be problematic and should be able to cause some problems, but then the opponent should be able to actually have cards to be able to deal with said stealth units. Hence, things like Lictors can get their 2 melee attack back. I think the Death Leaper maybe don't give it 7 melee attack, but do give it 5 life back, particularly when anti-stealth is going to be better in this game, and when I have things like Reavers which can actually deal with things like Death Leapers. I think things like the Encircle the Prey is still a really good card, and so hence Reavers become even more important in this particular matchup, and hence those 2 cards are we stealth cards, which I would definitely consider buffing. Finally, we're going to be talking about a playstyle which I think often doesn't seem to get played. And let me just check my notes. I do apologize. Tyranids. Yes. I know exactly what it is. The Big Bug playstyle. Ultimately, even still at this point in time, Tyranids quite often rely on their stealth playstyle with like Broodlord and Ravenous Hunger. They're able to kill their opponent, they're able to destroy them straight away. And as much as I do think maybe some of these units have been nerfed over time and they should be more scary, at the same time they are ultimately going to get nerfed overall because there's going to be better anti-stealth in this game and the people are going to start taking them to deal with these problematic stealth units. One thing I will say though is that often doesn't see play is a Tyranid Big Bug deck. And why is this the case? Quite often it's only because they only have Tyrant Guard as a decent Vanguard piece they're able to get in the opponent's way. For this, we need to look at the Hive Guard, because this is the other piece of Vanguard that the Tyranids should be relying on in principle to enable them to be able to stay alive. However, with its low melee attack and only leaving off 6 life, it often isn't able to do that job. Here's the proposed change: give it 1 armor. Don't decrease its life, keep the life the same, just give it 1 armor. With that high range attack, the 3 melee and 1 armor will actually able to stand in the way and cause problematic situations. For situations which won't be overbearing for the opponent. For example, quite often this Ultramarine card over here, these stats is pretty average. It still has the same melee attack, and even this card doesn't even get played particularly much because actually overall it's not that great. Yes, it has 1 less range attack, which will happen inside this Tyranid's favor. Guess what? This Ultramarine has a Codex ability. So overall, I think it's fine just to able to give this Hive Guard 1 armor to be able to do its job properly of standing in the way and preventing people from attacking it. And that's Tyranids. So next up we've got the Tile Empire, and first fundamental principle, what broken cards do they potentially have? And there's only 1 card I could really call broken within the Tile Empire faction. That is Emergency Dispensation. But really, it kind of requires a hyper-specific scenario to be enabled to truly get its combo sort of problematic scenario off. That is, starting off with Emergency Dispensation, choosing a troop, you get it on 3E, you draw it straight away and lowest cost by 3. You then follow that up exactly with a Lone Spear. This is because you get to choose, you will be choosing the Lone Spear, so it's more likely to happen than just being random. But even still, you get Lone Spear, it comes out on 4 energy, and then you're able to get this really well statted guy, which is able to cause a lot of problems. The opponent has to then sacrifice his health and a bit of resources to actually be able to remove it properly. Then you follow that up with just like an ideal 5 drop, I don't know, maybe Breacher, Sashu, or Broadside, or whatever, right? And then they lose, they don't have the fundamental resources, they're able to deal with those cards later on, leading to chaotic scenarios. That is like the worst thing that the Tile Empire can cause to an opponent in any sort of situation. Overall, that is highly unreliable and requires a very, very specific scenario to just enable it. It really does. Ultimately, I think Emergency Dispensation is actually a perfectly fine card. If I had to change it, I would make it lower its cost by 2 because it does get the choose effect and whatever. But I think it's fine as it is, as a legendary one-off card. Next up, we're going to be talking about the board clears, and there's 2 board clears actually Tile Empire kind of have. There's Relentless Fusillade, and there's also Hunter's Instincts as a sort of pseudo board clear. Relentless Fusillade, I think, does the job. I think it's like somewhat equivalent to Eldritch Storm, not as quite, because you do need a very hyper-specific scenario where you do have Chion Tactics in your hand to enable the Mark Lights to be able to deal damage to the board. That is a 6 energy combo play, however it does deal 4 damage to all enemies, And if you've got Markerlight opponent as well, it is actually a damage to face tool, which in this case, I don't think it needs that nerf. I'm gonna accept it as being perfectly fine. It is a rare card. It should probably be slightly more powerful, and so hence the damage to face I would accept as a perfectly fine sort of combination effect. Next up, we got Hunter's Instincts, and we're gonna be talking about this in a little bit with anti-stealth cards, but I will say for now, this card could probably use some buffs. I would change it to so every single time that it deploys a Recruit Hound, it does it for every single enemy troop. Instead of it being, so it's not every single enemy unit which is damaged, it's every single troop, so you have a reliable constant amount of Recruit Hounds that's actually able to deal with the opponent's stuff. But then you don't just have those situations where you somehow have to damage all of them, they're able to get all the Recruit Hounds that you need, they're able to deal with the board properly. This way it becomes actually a good tool, but not overbearing. What I will say with that is I kind of want to turn it into an anti-stealth tool as well. Hear me out. There was two cards I would turn into anti-stealth tools potentially for Tile Empire. One of them is Hunter's Instincts, which is the one I'd choose, and then also the other one being Kion Tactics, which I'll get to in a moment. The Tile Empire don't actually have an anti-stealth tool. They have none whatsoever from what I can see. I don't think there's a single card which actually removes stealth from the opponent's stuff, they're able to deal with it. So here's what I propose as Hunter's Instincts. I'd keep the changes that I've already just made, deploys one for every single, deploys a Recruit Hound for every single enemy there is on the board, and give them flank. But then I'd say afterwards, remove stealth from all enemies. This way, you're able to use multiple Recruit Hounds to kill problematic stealth units, and able to enable them to deal with the board. As kind of Hunter's Instincts suggests, it is their instincts which allow them to find the actual stealth units that you need to able to deal with all the stuff. And I think that would be just an appropriate change to enable sort of these combos such plays to be able to take effect and play. The final thing is, since because I think this will be quite a bit for a 4-cost card, I would change this to a 5-cost card to bring it more in line when appropriate to dealing as a board clear sort of card. It means that you play a Recruit Hound. Recruit Hounds have 3 attack each, you give them a flank, it makes it a 5-cost deal with the board sort of card, and you're able to put the damage where you want to sort of thing in need be. The downside is though, like unlike Necrons, Scythe Assault, these guys can't actually attack units with fly, so it can't actually deal with flying units. So it becomes a sort of very interesting board clear card, but which deals with stealth, but then also somewhat limited, which I think would be pretty cool. The other thing they could do is actually put in Kion Tactics. Kion Tactics could also remove stealth from enemies, made it quite a unique tool with the Markerlight. You could give them Markerlight 2, then you remove their stealth, meaning that you can attack your Warlord against it with the Markerlight 2, meaning it takes 4 damage from Markerlight. Let's say it's 4 range damage with the Markerlight, killing off the targets potentially, and if you need any extra damage, you probably have extra energy by that point to actually deal with the target. Overall, I'd say that would be a pretty interesting card and an interesting effect, and I'd like to see some play with that. Talking about stealth units, there is a couple of stealth units which I'd like to see somewhat buffed up. We've got the Stealth Shashui, Stealth Battlesuit, and then also Dark Strider. With both Stealth Battlesuit and Stealth Shashui, I find there's sort of a weird thing going on. They're really, really good, actually, on VAR deck. How, because of its ability able to give them extra life, able to keep them alive, and they end up being kind of perfect synergies. However, they kind of feel a little bit lackluster in other scenarios as well. This is what I'll do. I'll decrease their melee attack on both of them, but I'll give them both more life. Meaning they're more likely able to survive from anti-stealth effects a little bit. They'll still be taking damage though, but they would have a clear weakness from anti-stealth effects as well. Meaning that you use the melee attack against these guys and they're able to punish them that way. But there would still be decent trading pieces as sort of stealth bodies. They will enable them to go forward and be able to do stuff. Overall, I find that to be an appropriate change. Finally, we also want to talk about Dark Strider. I would just give him +1 life. I think he should be able to have average stats. I know you could cause problematic scenarios where you can get like potential problematic scenarios where he's able to put a whole bunch of drones into stealth along with him, but I think he will be fine overall. At the end of the day, I think Tal could use actually a slight bone, to be honest, and able to go with it. And finally, archetypes which could use some kind of buff to enable sort of playstyle. This is the weird thing about Tal, is that I think none of the stuff is broken, but none of the stuff is bad, dare I say. I think every single playstyle is viable and has potential ways to be able to use them. You can use Amazots for drones, you can use Shadow Sun for sort of aggro, you can use Onvar for pretty much anything, you can use Warshaper for infantry builds, and potentially Shadow Sun or Onvar for Battlesuit builds as well. And Battlesuits kind of, with their drone companion ability, fits in also with Amazots as well. Oh, in the right ways. So it's all very interesting stuff which could all potentially see play. The only thing I would say is if I really had to change something, this Sky Ray gunship could probably use one less range attack and have fly. Like, it's so bad. Give it fly. Goodness sakes. I think that would be appropriate and good change for this. Anyway, that's Tal. Next up, we've got the Sisters of Battle. Yes, and we're going to be talking about potential broken cards with them. The first broken card, which I think is very obvious that most people know about, is Sacred Rose. I ultimately think that all of the triggers, the Sacred Rose triggers, getting the one extra attack, 1 faith, extra life at 3 faith, and then also flank at 3 faith. Also, I just don't think they should get the stat increases and also the flank ability at 3 faith. I think it should be more of a staggered effect. Should be actually like something like 4, maybe 5 faith even. They should get the flank instead of it just being at 3. This way that they get bonuses when you play Sacred Rose. The sisters get bonuses at 1 faith, they get bonuses at 3 faith, and then they get bonuses at 4 faith or 5 faith, making it more worthwhile. I find too many scenarios where they just go relics into Sacred Rose on turn 5, enabling too many just damage combos going off. And I think it's just too overpowered. It's perfectly fine before the update. It's still perfectly fine after the update, and it goes into every single Sisters deck. Next thing I'll change is Aveline the Serene. I think she just does far too much as a card. Just the flank potential at 6 faith as a removal with a 7 melee attack. The fact that it's such a beefy body with 6 life and also shield means that it can't be easily traded into with the flying as well. I mean that you can't just trade it with a melee attacking troop easily. And then finally, even if you do have a range attacking troop, that 5 range attack, kind of crazy altogether. Ultimately, I would change it to still having the flank potential with the shield and stuff, but I would decrease the range attack. I think it's far too high. I think that should be reduced to 4 range attack, if not 3 range attack. And I'm thinking more towards 3 range attack, to be honest, rather than 4. It just means that the trading back to it is perfectly fine. And you're not going to be overly punished by trying to shoot this person who happens to have a flamer pistol shooting back at you. Next up, I would need to talk about board clears for Sisters. And I was going to say that board clears for Sisters is actually really quite good. You have multiple different options to actually be able to deal with minor board clear scenarios with Cleansing Flames and stuff, but they're not actual board clears. Real board clears are Spirit of the Martyr, followed by Arcoflagellants. These combination effects deals with most boards, to be frankly honest. Spirit of the Martyr, they're able to just keep on pinging for every single troop that dies from this. Just means that you can just deal with an entire board with it continuously pinging all the opponent's stuff. Can be kind of crazy, and so hence I would propose that this is perfectly fine. If anything, the only change I would make it do is it doesn't deal 1 damage to all enemy units, but it only does it to every single enemy troop. If you want to see it more as an appropriate actually board cleared, so it doesn't do damage to face principle. However, even then, Sisters are typically the ones who doesn't want to be damaged to face, so it's a good trade-off, I'd say, for it, to be frankly honest. So I would say, fine, just leave it as it is. But I can see the slight change there. The other thing is Arcoflagellants with their damage ability across the entire board. I think it's also a form of board clear, to be frankly honest. It's also a flank troop, hence I think we typically see this much more. And it does the job anyway, so I don't think there's any changes needed there either. Next up, we're talking about anti-stealth. Sisters don't have any sort of direct anti-stealth. I suppose the best anti-stealth is probably the board clear itself somewhat, plus Divine Intervention just by destroying all the enemies with the 8 energy, 8 faith effect. Fine, okay? There's nothing needed to be changed about that. But I think we're going to need to be talking about an interesting card here, which is Imperil Guard, which recently got buffed and I still don't think sees play. Imperil Guard stands 3 random enemies, and right now in the game that's actually probably good enough, and it does alright. It buys you an extra turn, but I think the problem I find with it is that it doesn't, even though it buys you an extra turn, it doesn't really slow down the opponent's tempo, and it doesn't really solve any of the problems. It just gives you an extra turn, and you can't really do anything afterwards once you've played it as well, unless you do have the 4 faith, in which case you're able to play a free drop when you stun 3 random enemies. My point is, it doesn't really have a role, it doesn't really have a purpose. You might be able to utilize it to get some things going, but to be honest with you, I don't think so. If you even play a free drop, they're probably gonna die to a flank troop, right? It's not really that crazy. So here's the proposed change that I've got for it. I would make it stun all enemies. First off, the stun 3 enemies restriction isn't really that great. You're paying 5 costs for this just to be able to stun isn't that amazing. Secondly, I would change it so that its 3 faith ability deals 3 damage to all stealth troops, and I'll give it a 6 faith ability on top of that, making it then reveal all stealth troops on top of that as well. It's not dealing 3 damage to all enemies at 3 faith. That would be kind of really crazy good board clear. The fact that it also stuns them as well. It's just dealing 3 damage to units which are already in stealth. And since because it stuns, it buys you the extra turn to actually able to deal with the stealth units later on. So it becomes more of a better stealth counter the later it goes on, but it's still not a terrible card just to play that 5 to be able to stun all enemies. That in theory can buy an extra turn for sisters, which could be valuable. Isn't amazing, but doesn't make it useless in other scenarios as well. That is proposed for anti-stealth. Sisters don't actually have any stealth units, so we can move on from there and just talk about archetypes within the sisters. And right now, sisters are kind of doing really well. They've just been updated with several different cards. I don't think there's really some terrible cards. The only thing I could really say is like a sort of a play style is the penitence, in the fact that there really just isn't enough penitence units, unfortunately, to really get a proper penitence sort of playstyle. Unfortunately, shame that they didn't do that with their expansion. They could have potentially have done that, adding more penitence type like units that enable more of a penitence sisters playstyle, maybe a more aggro / mid-range playstyle for sisters. They're able to actually diversify what they're trying to do / achieve. Ultimately though, I think sisters, this is sort of a cheat, it's an actual change, but sisters could use somewhat of a redo in how their faction works. And I know it's harsh, but it is true. Ultimately, they're kind of reliant on using relics to enable combos going off, to enable snowballing out of control. And that's not exactly a good thing. They should be gradually gaining faith over the time. And it's simply found that their prayer ability, their ability to actually gain faith over time, which is meant to be, really just doesn't often work to enable actually gain faith over time. It doesn't really do that. It's very easy to shut off. It isn't meant to be this prayer and actually gain faith over time effect. It's just a we just do we have to sorry. It just doesn't, and so hence we just relics, and then that just works into gaining faith at a time. It just ends up not really achieving it like its intended purpose. So here's the proposed change. It's quite a big one, but I think it works. Basically, the proposed change is that you still keep the faith mechanic altogether. You still do that, however you like double the cost of everything. So this faith effect to get to Crusader to 6 faith, well, go from 3 faith to 6 faith to actually enable this effect. Then you also you increase it for this to 2 to 4, that's 5 to 10. You just double the faith cost of everything. But the change I would say here is that prayer, if you use prayer, it probably automatically gets you a faith point. So you don't have to see if you get damaged or not or whatever. And so hence you guarantee to go and get it. There's done a lot of tweaking, yes, with that to enable things as well, to make sure everything works along with that. But I think that would be appropriate change to enable all of this stuff so that things don't get out of hand. And I think it would be appropriate for sisters so they're not getting too far ahead, but then also not too far behind. And yes, those faith numbers are going to go up to 18 eventually, but that's in the late game, and once it goes into late game, I feel like that is a good change, and that is actually how it should be, as intended. That it does get up to that faith point that enables this whole thing to keep on going. So yeah, that's Sisters. Now we're moving on to the GSC, and yeah. The bloody GSC. So of course we should just totally nerf everything, bring everything to the ground, remove all the command mechanics, and yeah, then I think there'll be a balanced faction. Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah. In all seriousness, no, I don't think that we should do that at all. But I think there is a clear outlier here, which we can go along and say as a broken card in a broken faction. Well, nah. Primus Safriana. I think she is far too strong for what she does. She's just the flexibility of drawing any kind of thing that you just need means that you're never going to get something bad with your card draw. It's always going to be the cards that you genuinely just want. If you need more of the troops, you're able to get more of the troops. You need more distractions, you're able to get more distractions. You can do certain decks where you're able to build around and completely around certain cards. All of this is possible only because Primus Safriana exists. You cannot do the same thing, you cannot go for the same combos, you can't do for the same plays either with any of the other 3 decks. And unfortunately, I think it's a real shame at the end of the day that Primus Safriana simply is just blatantly the best warlord out of all 4 of them. Just blatantly just better. The other thing you could argue for being a broken card is also Perfect Ambush. Guess what? This card gets seen play when people are doing roaming outrider build, where they go for 2 roaming outriders, and in principle you should only go for these 2 roaming outriders if you're going for a roaming outrider build. Yet I see in those decks people go for a Perfect Ambush as well, probably because it's the most broken card that there is in there. It's kind of crazy. It enables just ambush plays for the next turn to guarantee them being pulled off. It enables like just Vanguard protect your warlord plays as well. There's pretty much nothing which can get around it, and it's really bloody good for a 1-cost card. So with those 2 cards, what would I nerf about them? Perfect Ambush would be very simple, increase its cost to 2, and Primus Safriana, something does need to be done about its card draw. I know its healing ability has been nerfed. Heck, I would revert that, to be frankly honest. Heal all friendly units. I think that was perfectly fine. It's not the problem. Nothing's really changed about Primus Safriana with that nerf. It just means that some ever so slight edge case scenarios, she could, I guess, not die because she could have lived with 1 life, right? Edge case scenarios. Whereas now she would die because she doesn't have that 1 life. In all reality, I personally think just Primus Safriana, it's the card draw, it's this. So there's some options. You can change it so that one of the options is just draw a card. So it becomes a generic draw card, and you give us some other beneficial effect. The other thing you can do is have draw stratagem, but then the draw troop effect goes. But something I do genuinely think needs to be done about it, so that the other 3 can be brought in line and generically become better with combo pieces themselves. Because this is meant to be a combo faction, I recognise that. And I think being able to draw stratagem is still going to enable her. It's just that the crazy amount of flexibility that she's got, I think it's just, no matter what you do with these, unless you make them individually broken, which is not a good idea, things just aren't going to work. You're always better off playing Primus Safriana. So I think she does need some kind of legitimate change to a card draw to make the other warlords just actually be playable, to be frankly honest. So next up, we're going to be talking about that board clears, and they've actually got quite a good part of board clear, but it could use a slight buff. Main one we're talking about is main one. I think the only one really is concealed explosives. And basically what you do is you combine that with, where is it? Backstab. Deal 2 damage to the target if the create a sabotage in the enemy hand. If it dies. It's going to die to the thingy, it's going to trigger the ambush because it's going to take damage and then the ambush on your turn, and it's going to deal the thing. This is for 4 energy, and I would change it to deal ambush, deal 3 damage to all enemies instead of a 2 to 3. 2 to 3 becomes unreliable, 3 damage is the thing which is needed, so it actually does destroy and deal with the opponent's board. As I said, Storm Raven needs to be able to deal 3 damage to all enemy troops, other things need to do 3 damage. I would even change it back to change it so that it doesn't deal damage to face, it only deals damage to troops, because 3 damage to face on top of this might be a bit much, so it only does 3 damage to all enemy troops. I think this would be a really good change. I think it would enable it being a constant sort of combo play to guarantee deal with the board and able to give you more time to be able to do other things later on. And so hence I would just have this. I would just have it so that GSC Concealed Explosive does deal 3 damage to all enemy troops and able to keep you in the game sort of thing. With that being said, we need to go on to their anti-stealth, and they do technically have anti-stealth, and I want to talk about a change that I want to implement, but Spotted Ridge Ranger, I'm just going to say its uprising ability completely changes to something which isn't this. This is such a bad card for an uprising ability because it's so high in cost, so trying to play additional things on top of this is so difficult. Without it just killing your opponent, for example with Kellamorph, it just totally just doesn't become worthwhile, and I think it's a real shame. Basically, don't play this, guys. It's a really, really bad card. So, with that being said, that loses ability, does something actually relevant. What needs to be actually anti-stealth? Because right now, basically GSC don't have any anti-stealth. Well, there's also another really bad card called Perfect Host. It costs 2, it creates Neophyte hybrids in your hand that you can potentially play later. It's meant to be a value piece, but it doesn't actually do any value. It just, you're better off literally having a Neophyte hybrid in your hand and just playing it straight away. So this is also a bad card, and I think this could be changed into a really decent anti-stealth card. Let me tell you what it does. I'd change it to trigger the ambush of a friendly unit, so you could still trigger it on your Warlord even though your Warlord doesn't have ambush, that's fine. Trigger the ambush of a friendly unit and then reveal all stealth, and then reveal all enemy stealth units. This way it becomes another piece to be able to combine with concealed explosives, so it's not just relying on backstab to trigger concealed explosives. You actually have other combos to enable it, so it becomes more reliable. Secondly, it actually enables with other combo plays as well when getting outside of just one thing at a time. For example, Jackal Ambush, you can have this 2 energy to trigger its ambush, so it can actually gain the flank, so it can do ambush again to able to do its entire play that it's meant to be doing. Other things like Acolyte Heavy can actually trigger its ambush, so he's able to get that melee attack. Actually, that's not so great. Anyway, there is combo plays you can actually do that with. For example, Abominant gaining armor, that would be actually really quite nice. And heck, if you're really scary with that, Patriarch could even be able to get a combo off. Maybe I would give some sort of nerf to Patriarch, to be frankly honest, because that could be really actually problematic. Probably deserves it, to be frankly honest. But there is still good plays with that. For example, Sanctus destroying an enemy troop with the 2 energy combo would be really quite decent and actually scary. So I would, the combination effect, I think I would use it to see play, and I think it would be pretty cool and pretty interesting as an overall piece which synergizes all together. So yeah, that's GSC's anti-stealth. There's stealth units which could use buffs. To be frankly honest, not many of them. The Biophacus doesn't need any sort of buff to go in line with things. It's still giving your opponent poison that they have to remove straight away, so they probably can't even use anti-stealth to kill this without being punished for it. So the only thing would be Locust. Maybe Locust could become 4 melee attack. I could see that, and I think that would be fine. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. Nexus, I don't think this guy needs a nerf. His artifice ability is kind of really good, so yeah, I'd be fine with him just staying the same. Yeah, I don't see. It's only Locust. Only Locust could really need desperately, because I think the other two justify themselves, to be frankly honest. Finally, any sort of buffs to factions, that cards which I think could desperately use it. And I'm somewhat done a cheat with this one, but I think Primus Safriana is so much more powerful than the other three. She could receive a nerf and these could all receive buffs, and then they would all be on about the same power level. I really think Primus Safriana is that much more powerful than the other three, like confidently so. Just the GS0 combo faction, you need to have the cards for combos, and it's simply put it, Primus Safriana completely enables that. Hence some sort of restrictions to that, so it's not just guaranteed 100% of the time. That's not what I want to see, just guaranteed 100% combos. You have to sort of like build it and stuff. Secondly, these guys could use some cards to actually be justifiable in sort of what they're planning to do in their game style. For example, Magus of Real Nas could use some core card in their starting hand, I reckon, to enable sort of combo plays. So sort of like a key card, like maybe a neophyte leader, so sort of listing their starting hand, although that might be a bit much. I don't know exactly what. Maybe a lying in wait, that would be kind of interesting. It's hard to exactly say, but maybe it's just a completely unique card altogether, purely to Magus of Real Nas, so that it's able to pull off some combo plays that you wouldn't normally be able to see. Maybe any card is generated, because heck, GSC have ways of generating cards that cost 2 less for them. So for example, the Biophagus has a ways of, creating genetic enhancements in hand. I think there was a few others. These can generate cards in your hand. Magus itself is also going to be generating cards in hand. Maybe there could be a cost reduction as sort of like a combo play with that. You build up a whole bunch of stuff in your hand, and then they could be reduced in cost. Potentially. That's just an idea. I'm not saying that has to happen. Scenari. Her ability simply right now just isn't interesting, and really she should just be an ambush synergy piece. It shouldn't be doing sabotage. We already have Primus Safriana, and it's really good for sabotage. We don't need another warlord for it. Your warlord gains sniper. I'd change it to your warlord gains sniper, +1 range attack, and slay. Trigger the ambush of a friendly troop. In this way, it's got its own old power of actually being able to really good removal piece for the early game without taking damage, but it goes with synergizes ambush pieces instead of it just being a sabotage sort of piece, and I think that'll be far more interesting and far more better overall. Then we got Archod Ward, Venomorph, the whatever. I think it's a decent effect. Healing 1 is nice. Giving +1/+1 to all units, it does help. Maybe just the pool needs to be just a bit more of an aggro base to support him a bit more. Something like that. I can see it. I can also just see it. I don't know. Is healing 2 alright? No, but that might be a bit much actually. You just constantly use hero power and just constantly heal 2 and then just constantly punch face. Yeah, that'll be very equivalent to Titus at that point. I don't know, maybe he is just perfectly fine and he just needs more aggro tools to be able to go face with. That's what I'm going to say. Maybe he is fine. Maybe he could get a unique card. Maybe he could, for example, he starts off with Neophyte Officiate. Or maybe Magus of Real Nas starts your hand with a Neophyte Initiate in your hand, right? Something like that. Maybe he can get a Genestealer Familiar as a unique starting card. Something which it goes for aggro combo plays. He gets a Neophyte Initiate in his hand. That's what I'm thinking. These starting cards in his hand, so it enable combo plays, things you wouldn't normally be able to see. And I think this would all be good for the game. So next up we have the Imperil Guard. And I'm just getting my notes up. Where's Imperil Guard? There we go. We're looking at potential broken cards to start off with. And I do believe they actually do have a broken card. Just one. It's called Cadia Stands. I think it is too strong. It does do... If you're able to get this on 4 energy, I think it does do too much. It just the continuous extra resources this gets, even against good counter cards. For example, Dark Angels when I come up to with a potential really good counter card. I think this does just gives too much value even against in those sort of matchups, and it makes just the games where you're meant to be Ursula Greed aggro just ends up being completely worthwhile just to chuck in the Cadia Stands, because guess what? It synergizes with Ursula Creed aggro so much, just because Ursula Creed aggro really works with extra bodies, and this just gives you extra bodies. Yes, it's a bit more of a late game, but it just becomes worthwhile. I don't know what to say. It's kind of crazy that it just is. So I think by that point, if that is the case, to play this on 4 energy, the turn you get it sort of thing, I think it could just go up in 1 cost. I think it is justifiably can just go up in 1 cost. I don't have the card, of course, but I've played against it, and I can tell you right now that it's a very, very, very good card, and I don't see there being a problem in just increasing its cost. I think it would still be a good card at that point, particularly in the long game. The idea is that these changes do enable a bit more of a long game as well, so I think I'm completely fine with that overall. So we're gonna get on to board clears, and really the Imperial Guard only have 1 proper board clear. It is the Flamer Trooper. Duty, deal 2 to 3 damage to all enemies. This can be enabled with Commissar Denkler to give him flank straight away. The other option to enable it straight away is, trying to think now, where's the flank? Move. Give all your infantry flank this turn. And yes, it is, these things do enable these sort of flank plays. They're able to get all the flamers off, and it is very, very powerful. It is 5 energy combo, but I think I'm alright with that. Move has other utilities and synergies with it as well, giving all the other guys flank as well, to giving other synergy combos and whatnot going away. And Flaming Trooper can always be protected by Vanguard bodies. The other option as an actual removal board clear is actually Vox Operator. This is a very expensive version, but you could go for Vox Operator into a Manticore / a Valkyrie. Probably Valkyrie more likely. This is much more late game and requires those specific 2 cards as well to be forced to enable it. Overall, I would say that, yeah, like, it does the job. Really, do we want to be looking at Manticore and Valkyrie as a board clear sort of device? I don't think so. I'm not seeing it as a board clear. I'm only really seeing the Flamer Trooper, and then also 1 other card, Godspear Warhead, which I'm also perfectly fine with. It also does the thing that I want it to do, dealing damage to enemy troops only, but then it does also do a heck ton, so I very much appreciate this. Overall, I think board clears for Imperial Guard is probably fine. The only thing I'd say is that Flamer Trooper should probably just deal 3 damage to all enemies. If not, it should deal 3 damage to all enemy troops, and yeah, I think that's the change I'd make it. Just guaranteed 3 damage to all enemy troops, doesn't need to do damage to face. You can do that later on if you're an aggro warlord and you include this combo in your deck. I think it just needs to be able to do a job of guaranteeing actually killing the targets it should be killing. So I think I would actually appreciate that if that was the change they made it to. Deal 3 damage to all enemies, so it can actually do the job it's meant to, which is killing 3 health, spam the board troops. Next up, we need to be talking about anti-stealth for the Imperial Guard. And the anti-stealth, they do have 1 in the game, but really their better anti-stealth is Summary Execution, utilized with Verburn Vanquisher. Same reason why Orks is better. The Verburn Vanquisher, just Summary Execution, is because it kills a random enemy and then ends up becoming really, really quite good. Technically, they do have a stealth remove option, which is Recon Operation. All enemies lose stealth and camouflage. If no enemy affected, draw 2 cards. Really, you see this card not to remove stealth, but it's actually to just draw 2 cards. I struggle to see a scenario where I would want that. There are times where actually opponent actually has 1 guy with camouflage, and that's really annoying because it actually becomes a downside, because removing a camouflage doesn't affect me just being able to remove that random unit. All it affects me is just not being able to draw 2 cards with this card. Ultimately, I would change it to draw 2 cards and all enemies lose stealth and camouflage. Yes, this does make it a better version of Ultramarine's Hero Respite, but I can kind of accept that, to be honest. It doesn't do anything about damaging the enemy stealth and camouflage units. It doesn't actually stop them from existing. You still need to spend energy afterwards to actually deal with the stealth units, to be frankly honest. So I think it's perfectly fine that is their stealth removal. It's actually, if anything, slightly too expensive stealth removal, but you do get the added bonus of just card advantage with it. And then we needed to be talking about their stealth units that they have, which Imperil Guard have none. It's a shame that they don't have any Catachan to go around. Maybe that could be some sort of expansion, the Catachan expansion, that's all I say of a guild. And then after that, we need to be talking about playstyles, which often, yeah, I'd like to see some play with. Basically, there was a playstyle which was very popular back in the day, and I think I'll try it out again, have a bit of fun with it. But it was the Siege Warfare, where you get double Baneblade and double Rogal Dawn. And unfortunately, the thing they did to nerf that is by nerfing the Baneblade and nerfing the Rogal Dawn tanks. This is not what people wanted, I think, back in the day. What we really wanted is a nerf to Siege Warfare. So this is what I'll change. They actually enable that seeing that playstyle, so it becomes actually a really good reward in towards that late game, towards that high cost thing, but you don't just cheat these guys out really quickly by making this 8 cost and then getting all these tanks for free. This is the change I propose. We change it to the Siege Warfare actually costs 12 instead of 10. You can have 12 cost cards in this game, because guess what? Eventually, you're going to get to 12 cost. 10 shouldn't be the limit for a costing card in this game. I don't see why not. It's got 8+, make it 8+. Don't make the cap go to 10. If there's a card which justifies 11 in cost, it justifies 11 in cost. I understand 10 because it's like the big number and it's like, oh, it's double digits now. But just make it 12 cost. It would make it an appropriately cost card. It means that it has to be played on 10, even if you get the Commissar Denkler combo going with the Astropath. Then give the Baneblade back some of its stats. Give it its 2 life back. Give the Rogal Dawn the 1 extra armor back. Maybe reduce its melee attack to 5. Right? Something like that. So these things actually become proper tanks, proper threats, proper get in the way pieces. Oh yeah, and make it so its adjacent units have 2 armor instead of 1, which is like what it was back in the day. It's meant to have the 2 armor. It's meant to protect your Warlord. It's meant to be an alternative version of Vanguard. That was cool. Let's have it being cool again. Let's make tanks great again. Come on, Siege Warfare, let's do it. Like, increase the cost, because you can't be cheating out really overpowered stuff, but it will make it more appropriate if it just was a bit late in the game, giving the opponent a bit more of a chance to actually able to kill them before they get into these big tanks, and I think that would be a good thing. The other thing I could say along with that is potentially a bit of a different playstyle, but often doesn't see play. It is the Master of Lordance. At the end of your turn, deal 3 damage to a random enemy for every single friendly vehicle in play. Point being is that it's meant to synergize with a whole bunch of vehicle decks, but unfortunately there isn't quite the vehicles to synergize it with to guarantee this, and I think he could use some kind of a buff to enable these sort of like plays together. I understand he could get a bit out of hand, a bit problematic maybe for some players, but I think he's actually overall fine. Really, he just needs something to synergize with an actual sort of pure vehicle tank deck. I'm talking about these Thoraxes and getting in, an armored sentinel gets in, and a bombast field gun, and then you get the double chimera with the so-and-so, but you also get Commanticles in there, and the Lehman Risers, and the Valkyries, and then he synergizes with it all. What I propose is something like maybe his ability should be able to trigger once, and then you repeat it for every single friendly vehicle in play, something like that. Instead of just being deal 3 damage to every single friendly vehicle, just guarantee they will start triggering straight away, even if he's just the only guy there. So yeah, that's what I'd say for the Imperil Guard. So next up, we're talking about the Dark Angels, and we need to now talk about cards which are potentially borderline broken and could use some potential nerfs just to bring them back in line. And there is only one card which could even have a consideration in all this. That is Secrets. No, seriously, Secrets, what the heck? Like, geez, like, why are you able to get this with Asmodee's Secrets early on? That being said, I am slightly joking with this, although I genuinely do think some of these secrets could, like, not reduce the cost of everything by 3, and, you know, could just, like, not heal 3 every single time and stuff like that. Like, I'm just saying, like, the card draw secret's definitely the best one. Anyway, in all seriousness, in the cards which actually need to be nerfed, The only one I could really think of was Wages of Retribution. For the rest of the battle, when an enemy dies, gain 1. If you're able to play this straight away early on, it can cause some problems. I understand its purpose and actually what it's trying to do. But even then, I still don't think it's really that broken. I actually am pretty serious about the secrets themselves, like the cost reduction from the card draw and stuff like that. I think that those cards could be changed to be more appropriate, rather than Wages itself being broken. This way, you know, Asmodee's secrets doesn't just accidentally draw a secret and overpowers you because he drew all 3. He created 3 secrets and drew all 3 of them. No, he just created a couple secrets and then, yes, he might get lucky enough to use all 3 of them, but he's still not going to be as far ahead in that scenario as he was beforehand, right? So that's the only thing I would really change. Now, when I'm talking about their board clears, and in truth, Dark Angels only actually have 1 board clear, and there's a slight problem. The only board clear is Black Sword missiles. Deal 3 damage to all enemies with flying, and deal 1 damage to all other enemies. I don't mind the Black Sword missiles deal additional damage to flying units. I get that. I think that's perfectly fine. However, I do think Black Sword missiles, if that's really going to be a only actual board clear, Unwavering Zeal doesn't count as a board clear card. They need something else. Now, technically, you do also have Deadly Hunters as well. I will count that because it deploys 1 for every single enemy, and then you're able to use all these Deadly Hunters to actually deal with all those free health troops. But really, the solutions to actually deal with difficult problems shouldn't be locked to legendary cards. Plus, if there's only the legendary cards as a board clear, there's now be a 1 in 30 chance they actually have an answer at the right time. That's not a good thing either. So hence, I do suggest that this needs to go up in cost, probably around about to 5 cost, maybe even 6 cost, and then it can deal 3 damage to 6 cost for deal 3 damage to enemies, and then if they're flying, deal 5 damage instead. So deal 5 damage to all flying, 3 damage to all other enemies. Make it 6 in cost. I think that would be a appropriate change, so it actually does its job. It's kind of like a subpar Ravenous Hunger, but it's more powerful against flying units. Sort of situation. I think I would much prefer that than making it a sort of other situation. The other thing you could do is that you could just decrease its cost to 2 and make no changes whatsoever. It kind of then does become what's your actual board clears are going to be. Ultimately, I struggle to see the Dark Angels cards actually having anything outside of that. Also, just generic flank troops and maybe using Unwavering Zeal to clear some stuff. I suppose you could argue Deathwing Nightmaster, and I think that's fair. You've got double Deathwing Nightmaster and Deadly Hunters, but then you only have that if you're playing Azrael, I suppose. I guess Asmodee does have his secrets. Fine. If you don't want to increase it to 6 cost, then do the thing I said, decrease it to 2 cost, because heck, it really wouldn't be broken if it was just a 2 cost card and did the whole thing anyway. Potential stealth units could use buffs. To be frankly honest, I think Sergeant Taman's actually completely fine for its cost. If it dies to a Reeve on the next turn you deploy it, that's really okay. The Reeve is done only 2 in cost and blah blah. If they're really going to use a Reaver to remove this guy, fine. The only other thing would be Inner Circle Champion. And I think it's fair to go along and say it can have its 5 melee attack back, or maybe, because I wouldn't really want to increase it to 6 life to justify, you know, the increase in costs. I think it could just have 5 melee attack back with its stealth ability, and then those synergies be fine. It has anti-stealth for this card now. That's when you're going to use it, really, because there isn't any real other stealth going on, unless you're going to use this. I wouldn't recommend it. So hence those as actual stealth units which could actually get buffs would be appropriate. I forgot to talk about anti-stealth in this game. The Dark Angels are the only card in this game which I feel like actually have an anti-stealth card which does its job. It removes stealth from all the enemies, and it deals 3 damage to them. It's able to use straight away because it gives itself flank to have the agenda ability activate straight away. I think overall there's no problems I have with this anti-stealth card. It does the job it says that it needs to. It doesn't need a buff. It is perfectly fine as it is. However, it is kind of like I said with Deadly Hunters as being the only anti-stealth, anti-board clear card. This is the only anti-stealth card and it's locked to legendary. Not only is there only one copy in your deck, but also for new players how to encounter stealth units. Ultimately, I think there is an ideal card for this: Reconnaissance Mission. This card is an interesting card as it is, but I think just adding a stipulation so that it removes stealth from all enemies makes it an actual anti-stealth tool, because it costs 1, it removes stealth, and then you can spend the energy to actually deal with the troop however way you like, right? This way, it actually has more of a purpose just outside of this, and I would much prefer that. Even if they change it from its effect to not doing that at all, like remove stealth from all enemies, gain 1 thingy, very similar to martial superiority. It's just remove stealth from all enemies, gain 1 quest point. I would be perfectly fine with that as a change. This isn't often seen play, even though the effect is pretty darn cool. This isn't often seen in play, and I would like to see its effect actually been done and actually able to have that going on as an actual proper anti-stealth card, not just relying on legendaries all the time. Finally, I want to talk about play, which isn't often seen. I could talk about how Azrael could use a little bit of buffs here and there with the Deathwing Knight and the Deathwing Champion getting its basically their melee stacks tax back to how it was, and as much as I do think they should do that, I still do see Azrael's teleport gameplay style still being viable and something which is actually competitive and which can do its job, because the Deathwing Knightmaster still does his job, it still does the thing. However, what I will say with this is there is one particular warlord which really struggles and falls behind, and that is Belial. Belial has the fundamental difficulty that it does have some stealth units for its aggro sort of gym boss sort of playstyle. However, it does lack sort of like a mid-range tempo sort of option, a proper actual 5-drop beyond the Deathwing Knight, and really does struggle in that aspect. So this is the proposal I will make. Change March of Vengeance, because it's literally showing, is that Belial on the poster? I mean, it's got the Deathwing and so-and-so, it's got the so-and-so. It's very similar to it. It could be Belial, probably not, but still, it's showing a power more. I would really appreciate if they changed to March of Vengeance to give +2 melee. Still keen to gain 2 quest points, I'm fine with that. Even that, actually that can be straight up removed if they want to, but give it +2 melee, but increase the cost of it from 4 to 5. This way it becomes like an in-between between like, just like a cheaper version of, what's it called? Drachnien. But you get 2 of these, it comes the equivalent of Drachnien, and it becomes pretty scary, and it's a card which really synergizes with Belial to actually make him a proper beatstick and really something to be feared and, I guess, dare I say, intimidated by. It is going to be 5 cost, so it's going to be appropriately costed, and it's not going to get too far out of hand. It is going to be inefficient for that turn, as it's meant to be, but it does enable you to continuously punch face over time, but you get actually something quite scary. And that's Dark Angels. Finally, now we're talking about the Emperor's Children, and we have to now go along and think about a card which is, you know, broken for definite, you know, absolutely, and gosh darn, I was gonna say Lucius, I really was, in the past, maybe, but I can't even say that anymore, because I don't, his fundamental change means that you cannot trigger those stimulation effects, and since because of that you're not getting the damage output, so he's just not the same guy anymore. He just doesn't do the same damage output as he used to, so I can't even say Lucius anymore. So who can I really say? Well, the only thing I could think of is Rapturous Ruination. It deals 7 damage to all enemies. If you know you're ahead on life, behind on board, suddenly you're now not behind on life, not behind on board anymore, and you've done 7 damage to your opponent's face. You're suddenly now going even further ahead and able to end the game next turn, sort of thing. Or even that turn if possible. Right? Really quite a scary thing. I do get that, but I think it's perfectly fine, to be honest, and because it's a legendary, and so it's all fine. So really, I don't think even that needs to change. So there's not a single card in this deck which I can really say that there's anything broken with, and I think it's completely fine. So in terms of board clears, there's unfortunately only really 2. And I say unfortunately as if it's a terrible thing. I think it's fine, but it's a weird one. Let me explain. The innate board clears for, you know, the common man is the Helldrake. The Helldrake does a really good job. Rally field 3 damage to all enemy units. It's an 8 cost, so I'm not going to say it's fine doing damage to face. It does the fundamental job. It actually deals 3 damage to the enemy troops. It does the job we want it to. The only thing it is that it's a bit expensive for its cost. So I wouldn't mind seeing this go down to 7 cost, just so it can see more play in sort of like that region, so it can actually just be more of an appropriate counter tool to dealing with all the units. It's got really good effect, and the stats are perfectly fine considering it's quite a strong rally effect, considering it also does that damage to face as well. The other thing is exquisite swordsmanship. Slight problem is it's a legendary, but considering the Helldrakes, it might be fine, but it is your only actual board clear tool that you have right now to be able to do a job. So overall, I think they are fine because they have that 5 cost board clear, which is they desperately need. You know, you do also have Rapturous Reanimation on 7, and then you have the Helldrakes on 8 as well. I think it is fine. They'll just have to, you know, with like smaller boards, they'll just have to, you know, like smaller big boards, when it's like 4 troops in play instead of 8, they just have to do other things beforehand, like flank troops to be able to do all that somewhat. And I think they will be alright. It can lead to some problematic situations where you just don't have the board clears early enough in time, and I struggle to say exactly what could be done, but I think it's alright. Anyway, moving on with anti-stealth. We're going to go on to internal rivalries. The reason why we're talking about that is because Emperor's Children don't actually have an anti-stealth card. Like, they've got... Oh... No, they don't. They literally do not have an anti-stealth card. Yep, that's just to make sure. Internal Rivalries, this is why I want to talk about Internal Rivalries, because this is not a good card at all. It doesn't do anything that it's, like, dealing 1 damage to your own friendly troops, like, outside of being the perfect point to actually trigger an ecstasy for exec. It's not even worthwhile for that purpose, unless you do it for every single friendly unit. And Dark Pact of Excess is nice, but it's not really worthwhile. I think it would be appropriate though that if this card ended up getting some kind of buff, to make it an actual anti-stealth card, so it could do 1 damage to all units, triggering some ecstasy effects. Potentially ecstasy, but also cruelty effects as well. But then it can also reveal all stealth units. This way it ends up becoming far more of an interesting card, ends up being a more general round card, and I think I would appreciate something like that in the game instead. The other option is that we go to the Screamer Cacophonous, and this is where we start going, instead of there just being just a purposeful just 1 like anti-stealth card, this guy could have the rally effect. Instead of making a target enemy lose -4/-4 until your next turn, what you can do is something a bit more interesting, which is rally all enemy stealth and maybe camouflage units, but I'll probably restrict it to just stealth, get -4 until your next turn. And the reason why is it's sort of a screamer, it hits everybody. That's like the thematic thing behind it. You know, you don't, if you're expecting not to be hit, suddenly you do, because you're like, oh my gosh, this came out of nowhere. And now suddenly the stats or the stealth units are gone, so on the next turn it sort of provides you that extra turn that you desperately need as a sort of proper anti-stealth card. So that's another consideration as a card which could actually use some play for this, and I think that'd be pretty cool because it's unique and it's not just a straight up simple anti-stealth. Next up, we're going to be talking about cards which I reckon could use some kind of buffs for Emperor's Children, and I think Emperor's Children right now could really just use some help, and I think the control style could particularly use some help, something which really supports Lord of Cathal and Zanrath Demon Prince. I think Lucius is alright, but he's nothing broken right now, and so hence I really do think they could just use some Vanguard. Like the Muller Fiend could just use Vanguard, and I think just that, and it would be a perfectly fine unit. I think the Terminator Champion could gain Vanguard on Cruelty trigger. He sort of damages your friendly troops, but he's there also in a weird way protecting them, as sort of some sadistic sort of thing which is going on. Like, I will protect you if you give me pleasure or whatever. Sort of a weird thing going on there with him. And then another one is like the Flawless Blade. This guy is just the Slayer effect, deal 2 damage to the enemy warlord. I think he could also gain Vanguard as well. I think he can see himself as so perfect and so like majestic. Like, look at me. He ends up just getting in the way, because he's like there going, I'm so good. Look at me. Yeah, I could go along and take on that guy. Trust me. That sort of thing. So I think they could really use just some fundamental principles and the changes to that, and actually that would just enable some more longer game sort of playstyles. The Emperor's Children really desperately, I think, want table play, a bit more longer playstyle, and it'd be interesting if they did actually have some Vanguard units to support it. So that is my conclusion on how I would change all the game. I know this is a long video, so for all the people who have stuck around to the end here, thank you so much for staying around. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.